Helping Seniors Television, all about improving quality of life for seniors. If you're a senior, know a senior, or plan to be a senior, then this show is for you. It's all about helping you develop your own aging plan so you can age actively and with dignity. Helping Seniors Television from the Helping Seniors Network of information, education, and resources.
I'm Kerry, Fink, and welcome to this edition of Helping Seniors Television. You know, as a Florida 501c3 nonprofit, we exist for no other reason than to educate, inform, and connect seniors and their families to the resources that are going to make a difference for them as they move through their golden years, their retirement years, their senior years, whatever you want to refer to them at. And if you have ever met our president and founder of the Helping Seniors organization, a gentleman, retired Navy Captain Joe Steckler, who actually founded the area's Brevard Alzheimer's Foundation, created a thing called Joe's Club. He's been a lifelong advocate for seniors. His last command in the Navy was the U.S. Navy's retirement home in Gulfport, Mississippi. And when he and his wife retired here, they wanted to be close to the Air Force Base, or Space Force Base, as it may be called now. They wanted to retire here in the golden sunshine, like we all come to the Sunshine State for. But Joe couldn't stay retired. So shortly after retiring here, he's off and creating Brevard Alzheimer's. And after building that and Joe's clubs throughout the county, he retires from that. And when I met Joe, which was 2010, I believe, he said, Kerry, we learned a lot in the Brevard Alzheimer's. He said, there's lots of challenges that seniors have cognitively, but he said, there's many who are just fine cognitively, but have all these other issues that we need to navigate. And so that is how Helping Seniors of Brevard became a nonprofit, is to help seniors and their families navigate those nuances that you're going to run into. So many years ago, Joe talked about a thing which we talk about every single day now. He said, seniors need an aging plan. And what does that mean? That means it's like a hurricane plan, because we get that in Florida. It's not that you're hoping for a hurricane, it's you're hoping for the not hurricane. But you want to be prepared in all cases. And that's what an aging plan does for us too. We don't want a storm. We want to be prepared for a storm. And by taking advantage of expertise here in our area, you're going to learn a lot. So we have euphemistically called that, let's get your ducks in a row. And one of the first corollaries we added to that maxim was we said, don't try this on your own. And today's topic is really going to help us understand what kind of help is out there, because our special guest today is none other than Denise Bergman with Senior Care Authority Brevard. Welcome, Denise. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. I am so excited that we're getting to have this conversation because, you know, so often we have operated the County Senior Information Line now for getting close to a decade and a half, and people will call up to that. And we see it all the time. People will call up, mom's getting discharged from the hospital. It's not safe for mom to go home. She's got like a week or two in rehab, but then we got to figure out what we're doing because, you know, it's not going to be safe at home. So all of a sudden, people are making decisions about assisted living. Perhaps it's memory care. Maybe it's as simple as independent living, but something has got to change because the current living situation is no longer safe or appropriate. And so oftentimes in this day of age of internet, we think we'll just go online, do an online search and figure out what the best solution is. Or maybe we saw an ad on TV. It's an easy 800 call. We're going to call them and they'll tell us what's the right place for mom or dad or aunt or uncle. But the challenge with those things are, if you're doing the search yourself, do you really have the background to know what's appropriate for mom, dad, aunt, or uncle? Or if you're calling an 800 number, there's not really that much benefit because you're talking to somebody in a call center out in the Midwest who's trying to tell you about Brevard County, Florida, when it seems like it makes all the sense in the world to talk to somebody who is an expert who locally has been in the front doors of the places you're talking about for mom, dad, aunt, or uncle. And Denise, that's kind of my understanding of what you do at Senior Care, is that you help families figure that out. Help fill that out and get it correct for me.
Sure. Well, everything you're saying is correct. And that's what happens. You have the adult children that are working full-time jobs. some of them still taking care of children of their own. And when mom or dad are in a hospital or rehab situation, you're right, it now becomes an emergency. So the best thing to do would be to reach out to someone like myself or anybody else in the community that's a placement agent, because we are local. We live in the community. We are local. We can see from our adult children what best suits their needs. So instead of that adult child or spouse or family member going on the internet and accidentally registering, and now they can't work with an agent because they're already registered online, they work with us. So they can call a placement agent like myself, and we do an in-depth discovery. So there is no charge to the family for that. And we go into the person's medical background, social background, anything about that family member so that we can best devise a plan. So after that assessment, we then do the research. What best fits this family's needs? And then after that, we tour with the family. So we go with them. We work hand in hand. We go from start to finish with the family. So we are their advocate. We are their advisor. And most times I become their friend because you want to be able to take this burden off of their shoulders so that that person can now go back to being the spouse or the daughter or the son. And then we take on that research part.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about there's another fact in all of this, like the county that we live in particular. And I think this is a problem when you either are trying to research stuff on your own online or trying to call an out-of-state service that is trying to do maybe a slightly more educated version of that internet search to try to help you locate this. The problem is our county is such an unusual county. It's 72 miles north to south here in Brevard County, and I think it's only like 11 miles wide or something at the widest. And the key is that there's all these different cities in our county. So you can go, we go from Mico to Mims in our county. And in between there's Titusville, there's Cocoa, there's Melbourne, there's West Melbourne, there is Palm Bay. I mean, and then we don't even get into some of the subdivisions of all of that in our county. Right. And so somebody looking on an internet map might make a mistake of saying Titusville doesn't look that far away from Cocoa. But that's not really practical for how people live here on the Space Coast. And so, again, what I wanted to ask you about was also, I heard this statistic. I don't know if it's accurate or not. You can let me know if I'm in the ballpark. But I heard that there's somewhere in the vicinity of 140 different options for senior living right here, just in our county alone. Yes. Does that sound about right?
Oh, absolutely. And they go from small care homes, which is a residential home that has their license to be called an assisted living. And then you go to your assisted living communities that could have up to 26 beds. Then you have the larger assisted living communities that could have up to 200 beds. Wow. And then after that, you have your memory care, standalone memory care, which are your lockdown communities. So there's so much. And, like we were talking about earlier, when you have the adult children that are working, they want that location to be close to where they live so that after work they can go visit. And that is so important. And like you said, if you have somebody that lives out of state and they're looking for a family member here, if the fact that they live out of state may not make such a difference. But if you live here and you need to still go, and visit, which I always advocate for, no matter where your family member is placed, you must visit. You have to be there. So that's important to be their advocate once they are placed. All of that is very important. Location is key.
And that's another point that I want to ask you about, because as I started to get a concept, when you talk about 140 different locations that could be a place for mom or dad, you really have to start to ask yourself, how do I figure out what is appropriate? And I want to start by asking you a couple of the questions. Like, I've heard this from talking with some directors of assisted livings where they're actually kind of maybe off mic snickering at families that will come in. And here's why. They're not being disrespectful, but they'll bring mom in and it'll be the son or the daughter, and they say, well, show me the pool. show me the weight room, show me all these things. And then usually the executive director will say, is that what your mom does? No, she usually sits and watches TV. So it's not that you're viewing this, but you might be viewing this from the lens of what's appropriate for you. But are you actually thinking about the things that are best for mom? And I'm not saying you're doing that with like a wrong intent. It's just we think about the things we want, but we're not understanding that generational difference. And that's a thing that you are expert in, right? Because as the family comes in, you take the time to explore what's important for that person so that you can match things up for the best result.
Absolutely. And during our discovery call, we focus a lot of our time on that. What hobbies did your mom or dad or family member like to do before they fell ill? What are the type of things they like to do when the weekend comes and there's not a lot of staff around, and are they going to want to stay in their room, or are they going to want to go out in the screened in area and have some sunshine? So everybody's so different, but all of those things are important. Some that are higher level may want to have a pet. And if they're in independent living, they can. So, these are all the things we'd like to explore so that the senior is comfortable with the move.
Yeah. And, there's so many dynamics to this because we were talking before we began the TV program. I was sharing a story, and I'm sure you can too, about a senior that I was aware of who, these people, like you meet them and you're really not sure if this is going to be the last time you meet them, just because you can tell that they're having a rough day and it's not going well and they're moving slow and you're just really concerned how they're doing. And I was telling the story about this particular gentleman. I ran into him later at an assisted living facility. I didn't know he'd moved there. And I heard him yelling my name from down the hall. And I was like, this is the person that I saw some time back. And it was like a whole new lease on life. And what I was commenting and ask you to say if you think is see the same, is I thought, well, they're getting the right nutritious food now. Somebody is helping make sure the medicines are being done at the right time in the right way. There's some social stimulation that doesn't happen when you're just out there on your own. And it just seemed like it took 20 years off of this gentleman's, just his everything.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that. And ironically enough, today, when we were out chatting with some of the folks that were here at the Senior Resource Center, two of the ladies lived in an independent living community in Brevard County, and they're very, very happy there. And here they were out here socializing with everybody. Yes. And we started chatting, and I told her, I actually placed somebody at your community and she's going to be moving in next week. And they were lovely. And they said, oh, we'll look for her. We'll meet with her. We'll greet her. And it was so nice. And the woman who I placed, unfortunately, her husband died 2 years ago, and she's been extremely depressed and living with her daughter and just felt like she just had no purpose. Yeah. And she was lonely and she wouldn't get out of bed. And she admits herself she was spending far too much money on things on Amazon that she didn't even really need. And now she's going to move into her independent living home next week. And she's excited. And she, like you said, she has a new lease on life. And it makes me smile just thinking about her.
And that's the other part is like, I think you go from surviving to thriving when you get that right match, right? Because there's a whole level. Like I know I've seen people say, no, my mom is not a social butterfly. She just likes to sit home all day and watch TV. That's what she likes to do. I've seen that same mom get into an assisted living and all of a sudden she's got a social network. Things are buzzing. Yes. And again, it's the same thing. It seems like it adds years to the person's life because their whole outlook and demeanor and spirit of life is just different.
It absolutely does. And I have to share this because this makes me smile. I took this family for a lunch tour at this particular community, and it was lovely, and the lunch was very good. And there were two gentlemen sitting at a table just to the side of us, and they were chatting away. So I thought, let me just, ask them if they're happy here. So I did. And, they were just pleased to meet, my guest. And they started chatting, and the one man said, well, I just broke up with my girlfriend. Are you single? And it was so cute. And they all started laughing, and it made her smile, and it was just great. So, and that's what I wanted to see in her. That's what I wanted to see. Just that smile again.
Yeah.
It was great.
But there's another thing too, because we're talking about that there are so many different types
Yes.
of assisted livings, independent livings. We really are blessed to live in a community that has some tremendous resources. But I got to tell you, I don't know that most of us are really aware of the depth of resources that we have in this community as far as senior living goes, because many of us are familiar with high profile locations. Maybe they have a big ad budget and they're able to, there's places that look like you're checking into a fine,
Right.
upscale hotel, but there's also places that are very much like I'm in the front living room of my own home.
Yes.
So I've seen, I wanted to ask you about this experience, but somebody says, well, my person is not going to be comfortable in a place that looks like they don't want to live in a hotel. They like their home, but that's an option too.
Absolutely. And there are so many wonderful homes like that in Brevard County. Now, of course, I suggest to everybody, go through a placement agent and visit them first, because it is one thing to go online and see those photos or even virtual tours. It's always best. I always advise go for a tour, because it's important to use all of your senses. You want to smell, because you can't smell the room when you're just looking online. Maybe they had cats in the house, maybe it's just, there's a lot that maybe it's moldy, you can go in there and you can see if things are clean, or, are there items that are broken? Because when they put those photos on the website, it's going to be pristine, it's going to be the best photo. But if you go in, but there are so many that are just lovely. I visited a couple just last week where they take, 6 seniors. Some take all female, some take all male, and some are co-ed. Everyone is different. And it is a very homey feel. The majority of the homes have beautiful yards that have screened-in backyards. They can go and enjoy the weather. And they play games. They have home-cooked meals. It's a very nice environment. And of course, then you have those others that want to be in a larger community. It just depends on their medical needs. You have some folks that need a lot of care. They need a lot of help with their activities of daily living or ADLs. And those, it just depends. It really depends on the situation you're at, but there are options pretty much for everything here in Brevard.
And that's another whole aspect to this thing, is that when you actually go in the front door and these places inside and out, and you have a sense for where the rising stars are. This place has got great management. This has got all these things going the right way. This is a good fit for my person that I'm trying to help. And so one of the things I want to talk about is the fact that your service, I would say, like, is this an expensive service? But it's actually no charge to the consumer.
Correct. So my assistance there's no charge to the families whatsoever. I do a consultation call. We take as long as it takes to get that good picture of the senior. Then I do the research on my end. I tour. And once we make a placement, if we do, sometimes maybe we don't. Maybe the family's not ready just yet, and that's okay too. But if we do make a placement, then the community pays me a marketing fee, and that's how I get paid. But the family does not have to come out of pocket. And then, of course, once they make that placement, then they go and they pay their monthly rent or their cost of care, however the community has it worked out.
Which is a point that I also want to bring up and ask you a little bit about. So I know, because you and I have talked about this off camera, that you personally make it a point to make that fit, the right fit, the first time, because it can be very stressful on your loved one. If they get into place, it's not good. Now they've got to be uprooted and removed and all kinds of things like that. Talk a little bit about why that's such an important part of it for you.
Well, it's huge, especially if you're dealing with a senior that has dementia. To make them move a couple times, that just really, the transitions are extremely stressful and can affect their behaviors as well, and also their memory. So we take a lot of time to be sure that where we're going is the right place. So, you're dealing with somebody with memory care and memory issues. That's a whole nother story than compared to somebody who may just have medical needs, but cognitively they're okay. In either situation, though, I really want to avoid 2 moves. You're already moving from your home or from rehab, into a community. So we want to make that move right the first time. And once they get there, if there are any issues, I always would encourage the family to go directly to the executive director and try to work it out. Don't, just, it's a very stressful time. You just want to take it step by step. You have to make that transition slow.
Yeah.
And because it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy transition, but it's usually the safest thing to do.
Yeah.
So,
But it seems like to get that right really on the first time. And I think that is a function of, I had a friend of ours who used to say all life is lived local. Like we might watch national news, we might watch I would say intergalactic news, but certainly worldwide news.
right.
But the reality is most of us live our lives locally. We shop in the local store, we go to see a local, it may be a national movie, but we're going to go see it in a local theater. But I was thinking this really comes home when we talk about finding that right place as your next residence. If you're moving beyond your home, or maybe it's not safe to go home. I know you do specialize in helping families make transitions in time of crisis, but one of the things, and a lot of times stuff just happens, and now it is what it is, and you're going to make the best that you can. But it does seem like you lose a lot of options or opportunities compared to when you can take a little bit more relaxed approach and say, I'm going to spend the next couple of months and kind of nose around and really figure out what my move is. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That couldn't be farther from the truth. So I was working with a client, an adult child, whose both parents were in rehab at the same time.
My goodness.
So this poor woman, not only was she working a full-time job,
right?
Mom fell, ended up in rehab. A very week later, the father fell, ended up in rehab. Her hands were so full. Now, clearly, they're both 80 years old. They did have medical issues. They currently still have medical issues. And what happened was they just didn't want to take that step. So they chose to continue to live on their own, though their medical issues just kept getting worse and worse. They were becoming more frail. So now here they are. And now who's having to deal with all the issues? Adult daughter who works full-time job.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is when we see our parents or we see our family members getting to that point, we want to educate them and let them know that there are these wonderful resources in Brevard County that they can just leisurely start learning about, so that when things start to go south with their health, it's not this crunch time. And like you said, you have options and you're more in control, and you could take the time to tour these communities and know what your options are, because it's a sad situation when it comes down to this. And this poor lady gets no sleep. She's so stressed, and it doesn't have to be that way. It just doesn't have to be that way.
I even as you were talking about that, the thought comes to mind is like, okay, so one part of this whole equation is if you can get ahead of it and look ahead of it. A lot of times, I guess, as the adult children of aging parents, and we feel guilt, we're like, we really, if we do this, mom or dad is going to be kicking and screaming in the hallway because they love being at home. And it's kind of like, maybe that's part of the reason why sometimes we end up putting this off, because we don't want to maybe force the issue. But then when something happens, now we have to. And it's even all that more traumatic. Whereas if we could start to have these conversations early, it seems like everybody would have a better chance to work their way through it. And I love something that we were talking about today, a comment that came up from our own operations director here, Nancy Deerdorf at Helping Seniors. She said, she struggled with this. And when she finally got her dad to the right place, she told the story much like we were talking about just before, where he had a great 10 years. And then she goes, but the nicest part for me was I didn't have to be the stressed out caregiver. Yes. I could be the daughter and have quality time with my dad. And I was there all the time. Talk a little bit about that.
That's so important. And I see it in my own family right now. My father is now my mother's caretaker. My mother had a surgery and she had a lot of complications. And my father is now her caretaker. And it is extremely stressful. And as an outsider looking in, you see that it really does take a toll. And for those folks that are listening to this, I'm sure you all know somebody or are in that situation. And mental health is so important. And what happens is when you become stressed yourself, then you become sick.
Yeah.
And that person is depending on you to take care of them. So we can educate people to hopefully stop that cycle. So, of course, myself and my siblings, we all pitch in to help. And, hopefully my mom will get on the right track because hers is from a surgery. Right. But at the same time, I share options and resources with them all the time so that it doesn't have to be such a burden because there's a lot available to us in our community.
There is so much that's available. We live in a great place with great resources. We're talking with Denise Bergman with Senior Care Authority. Denise, if somebody wants to get more information and say, okay, I'd like to give a call and kind of like just talk over what's going on and get maybe some advice because of your experience, how do they get in touch with you? What's a good step to take?
Sure. So I do have a website and Senior Care Authority of Brevard. They can also call me, my cell phone at 321-549-9045. I also have an office space at the beautiful Helping Seniors of Brevard, and I'm happy to meet with families here and just start discussing and researching plans for their loved ones.
Yeah. What I love about it is an opportunity to get real help at no cost to you, but guided from an expert who really cares, somebody who not only knows the industry, has been through this many times, knows how to guide correctly. And instead of you having to sit there and pull your hair out and try to be stressed about it, get some help. Call in a team, make it happen. Call Denise Bergman, Senior Care Authority, and let's start researching it. So that's the time we have for this edition of Helping Seniors TV. See you next time.
I'm Joe Steckler. Thank you for joining our program today. I'd like to remind you that our senior information line is available to you at 321-473-7770. There you can get help and direction that could be helpful for your specific situation or circumstances. The work of helping seniors is very important, but we can't do it alone. That is why our sponsors here in Brevard County are so important. I'd like to thank our many area sponsors, businesses and medical providers who support the mission of helping seniors that help us carry the cost of our media efforts. If you'd like to join us either as a business partner or simply donate as an individual, we welcome your call at 321-473-7770. You are always welcome to visit our website at www.helpingseniorsofbrevard.org. Thanks so much for your help. It does make a difference.